when you have the numbers, a army person or national guard or police officer or whatever is going to have a lot harder time waving his club into a crowd when he can reasonably assume that his own friends and family are in it.
Yeah, okay.
Cool. So, hello everyone. I'm going to have a discussion here. Are riots and political violence justified? We're going to do 5 minutes each introductions, introducing, I guess, both ourselves and then our opinions on the topic. 2 minute rebuttals to what was said. Probably like an hour of just open discussion, and then 2 minutes each closing statements. So let's go ahead and just jump right into it. I think. Do you want to start with your five, or should I start with mine?
Why don't you go ahead? Because I think that would be better for this debate.
Yeah, sure thing. Cool. So I'm gonna go ahead and press start on the timer here. All right, cool. So here are some of my main arguments on the justification of political violence. So
Okay.
first, to clarify, what is violence? I mean, obviously, like shooting or injuring a person is violence, but you think like is breaking a window or destruction of property violence? In the same way, in the same category, is to what extent do we acknowledge that systemic violence exists? Like if you live in a impoverished area and a coal burning plant is built in your neighborhood and that causes cancer rates in your area to skyrocket, is that do we acknowledge that that is violence in the same way that like shooting someone or breaking a window during a riot is violence? The other point that I would like to stress is that politics itself is always about violence. Obviously, politics, a politician calling for a drone strike, is very directly, a violent act. But even something as small as regulation is usually backed by the violence of political power. So if they, if your local state, governor or whatever passed an ordinance that all home dwellings had to come with air conditioning, and your landlord or you are a landlord and you refused, you would probably get some sort of fine. If you refused to pay the fine, you'd probably have a court date. If you refuse to show up with the court date, eventually like state, backed violence, comes into play. Whether it's, a drone strike or something as small as like a little regulation or something, it's backed by political power. And if political violence, could be justified, have we reached that point in regards to, say, like the Black Lives Matter protests or something? Is the violence that, whether it's burning a police precinct or whatever, has the threshold for what is justified already happened? Because a lot of times, people will say political violence is never, never ever justified, but then they're okay with, hey, if a guy who's disgruntled and has some issues and stuff, and he goes and he's like mowing people down with his car, or he's one of these like spree shooters we so often see, we are okay with political violence coming in to stop them, right? So we often justify what forms of political violence takes place. So if we're justifying the state coming in to stop some sort of spree shooter that's gone into a mosque or whatever and is doing a spree shooting, do we justify like the thing that we just saw with the that Kyle militant kid that was like shooting protesters and they're trying to stop him? The last couple points that I would like to make is that people are products of their environment, of course. So I did not today, nor will I tomorrow, sell drugs because I didn't grow up around people selling drugs. I wouldn't really know how to I wouldn't know how to start. I've had college experience and job opportunities and housing opportunities that allowed me to avoid, relying on the black market for my survival. However, if, on the other paw, if I was raised in an impoverished area, dilapidated schools, limited to no job prospects, and then the only people around me with disposable income were people selling drugs, then, all the more likely I would engage in that activity. And I feel like the same happens with rioting. It's like once the conditions are there, people just behave predictably. Whether it's like a sports game and people are rioting after, or whether it's like the Kent State, the National Guard shooting students at Kent State, or whether it's the George Floyd being murdered. Conditions exist for rioting to occur, so obviously then rioting occurs. Oops, I'm running a little shorter on time than I thought. Some of the other points I wanted to make. Riots are not political action in the same way that, say, something like the political group, the Plowshares, that like went and jackhammered nuclear missile silos to like demonstrate that those silos were first strike silos. That's like a planned, attack of political action, where riots are sort of this unplanned, circumstantial, reaction thing that's it's reactive. It's not like this planned thing. And then last sort of thing, I guess, in my last 30 seconds, is that it's the opposition that decides what mode of protest takes place. So if systemic racism exists, knowing about it, is that enough to make changes happen? Okay, cool, problem solved. If problems don't get solved, okay, maybe raising awareness, protests, kneeling during the anthem, that's going to raise more awareness. If that doesn't work, things start to escalate because the problem isn't getting solved. So it's the opposition, it's the state or whatever company is being protest that is deciding what means of protest they're going to choose to listen to, and that would probably include what I would consider justified. Oops, and there goes my timer. Justified political violence. So that's my 5 minutes. Dismiss. Cool, and then I'll start 5 minutes for you. Ready and begin.
Okay. Yeah, this is a complex topic because, like Nelson Mandela said, that he would rather do escalate situations where he's doing like sabotage to get a point, rather than go full out violence. And the reason being is that you can't determine ahead of time how the leaders of the organization that's resulting in violence would approach the violence. Would they escalate it so beyond that even any reasonable rioter would say, well, that's even gone beyond. Now they're skinning children alive and killing babies. So there's degree of violence that has to be considered. And then there's the moral side of the issue. A person that's driven to violence because they haven't been able to, the system just simply is broken. At what point has their violence reached a point where now they are the tyrant? And then another issue that must be addressed is that when you're in like we live in a republic that's a democracy, so we actually have a process to go through so that we don't have to resort to violence, and freedom of speech and right to gather and to protest up to the point is justified by everybody. But if we want to get a point across where we actually change the direction of a society or just completely change society, then resorting to violence itself could, in our situation, in our country, result in turning off the very people you need to convince in order to make the changes. Because if you have a divided country, then if only 50% of the people agree to the change, because they're now, it's dropped down to 20% agree, because the violence was so abhorrent that they completely have turned away from the issue. So it's a matter of degrees, I think. Now, property damage, I don't think is violence, because I think that is a matter that is, especially private property. If I come and break windows out of a building and loot it, then that could be considered criminal activity on the one hand, or it can be justified criminal activity in that this is the only way I could go about getting the attention, driving up the public opinion of the business people up to a point where they demand a change. We also have a situation, and you mentioned the kid that was shot, the kid in Kenosha. Well, I didn't think that the police violence, because I consider police to be the coercive power of the government, is what we have with police. This is how they get you to obey laws, is they have a coercive power. But they've lacked restraint. And in the case of the guy getting shot, well, now I guess it was 7 times that this guy got shot. I've seen the incidences involved, and I could not find any reasonable reason why the police shot this guy 7 times in the back. So I think at that point, the violence may be justified in that it would be coercion against oppressive coercion. But if I think there's different levels in order for I agree that violence is okay. I guess each case is a case by case situation. Now, with the Black Lives Matter, I have no problem with Black Lives Matter because we have political parties, and I kind of consider Black Lives Matter as being a quasi political party that they are using techniques that many may not feel, they like. Of course, there's a lot of prejudice and racist people that just don't blacks, period. So I have to take that in consideration. But with the other people involved, I think that what's happened is that we have people that are not there for the black people and their
Under a minute,
their
just a heads
rights
up.
and oppression. I got 1 minute left.
You're at 40 seconds.
Okay, I don't think that those people that are outside the Black Lives Matters organization, if it's their demonstration exists, have a right to do the property damage. They're just there for chaos and and anarchy is what they are. And I think that it's justified for the police to take violence action against people that really don't have anything to do with the issues that you're violating, like a revolution, like if a country, people wanted to overthrow a government, and then you have like thugs and mafia type people that are in the fringes doing all sorts of damage. And I think it's perfectly justified for the violence against them. So I guess that's where I'm at. It's a complex situation. And
that is time. Yeah. So cool. I'm gonna go ahead and do my 2 minute response, and then you could do your 2 minute response, and we're gonna open it up to
okay,
to the general convo. So let's. I got 2 minutes here for my response. I jotted down some things as quickly as I could. Ready, set, go.
Okay.
All right, cool. So you were asking if violence makes us a tyrant, and I feel like there's been a lot of arguments for this, right? Like you're putting yourself in. Once you start committing violence, you are becoming, like your own aggressor. You're becoming like the oppressor by the hate. You're becoming like the murdering cops if you start murdering cops, right? You start to mirror each other's actions. But I don't think so. Like an example that I've heard that I rather like is like if a woman is fearful of sexual assault and she attacks the assaulter, she doesn't herself like turn into a rapist, because like the violence that she is doing is very different, right? So even if her punching him is mimicking, is a mirror of him punching her, her action is justified because the outcome and the goals of the action are so different. It puts it in a totally different category. And I believe that Antifa, Black Lives Matter, whatever, burning buildings and burning police precincts and stuff fit that category of being a totally different trajectory and goal. Man, 2 minutes is so much shorter than I remember. So you said that we're in a democracy, and so violence should be able to be averted by if we vote for things or stuff. Michael Albert explains this in an interesting way that I like. He talks about if you wanted to put in a traffic light at an intersection because accidents keep happening there. Now, hypothetically, you can just appeal to your, city council or whatever. But if they had a reason to not want to make that change, you would need to raise the cost of them not making the change to motivate them to make the change. So that's basically what protests and stuff are, is that, we've tried just putting out studies that show systemic racism is happening. We've tried, kneeling, showing that systemic racism. The longer that a response is not forthcoming, the higher stakes the protesters must make in response, and that is my time.
Yes, I kind of agree with you on that to a degree. But in your opening 5 minutes, you mentioned the person in Kenosha, the 17-year-old kid.
Oh, you're ready for me to start your 2 minutes?
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay. Ready, and nope, and here we go. Go.
Am I on?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I disagree with it. Seemed like your point that there was something adverse of the actions taken by the 17-year-old kid, because I've watched numerous videos taken by cell phones and so forth, and it looked to me like he was confronted with violence. Now, argument said, well, he came for violence. And his argument and the militia that were there was, no, we came to protect people's property from violence, from people burning their buildings down. So we were perfectly justified in doing that because the police itself was not stopping the violence against the people's built property and buildings. So we came in and took the authority ourselves. And our country has a long-standing rights and practice of militias being formed by the citizenry. He was acting, in his own words, as a militia person. So him shooting people that were attacking him, because he was the one being chased. He had actually been down where the property was being damaged, and he was protecting the property. So I disagree with the arguments that this guy created violence because he's the one that was the aggressor. He wasn't the aggressor, in my opinion. But this is a problem when you resort to violence, and it's an issue that every organizer, like Black Lives Matter, they have 3 people that actually organized it, and I listened to one of them, and he's a guy from New York. I listened to him in a debate, not more of a discussion, a debate, and I understand the oppression, and I fully agree
15 seconds.
that the system hasn't worked, so they need to up the thing. I just guess the violence part of it. I think we need to really take a look at whether we need to resort to violence, where killing people and everything, and because that is where violence ends, is where you have body bags, and then if it escalates beyond that, you could get a lot of people killed and still not accomplish your goal. So I guess there has to be a level. How far are you willing to push the violence part of your aggression to where it becomes it's not a solution. It becomes a hindrance to there being a solution to your long-term goal.
And so, that's time.
Okay, that's enough.
So let's just jump into the 1 hour open discussion. I'd like to jump off of that, off of something that you said, if I can. So I'm going to go ahead and press this start here. So to what extent is violence necessary? And one of the other things you brought up is, to what extent does violence turn people away? And political theorist Slavoj Žižek talked about this. He said, like, if you have a protest, like, let's say, like the Iraq War protests, for example, where there's almost zero violence or rioting or broken windows or anything, then, like, nobody cares. There's no news attention, there's no media attention on it, no one's talking about it. But on the other side, if you have a movement that is, like, primarily breaking windows and, like, setting cars on fire and whatever, then, like, the everyday people don't want to join it. So you have to kind of, like, his argument was that you have to kind of straddle that perfect equilibrium of breaking enough stuff that people are like, wow, this must be really serious, because our society, our system values property so much and takes the destruction of property very seriously, directing eyes towards it, starting conversations about it, but not so much that it's turning people away from the movement.
Yes, that's a good point you make there. And I grew up, I'm quite a bit older than you, and I remember in the 60s, I'm a product of the 60s, and we had the Weather Underground, we had the Black Panthers, we had a woman that was kidnapped. Her father was very wealthy, Hearst publication. Her name was Patty Hearst, and she got kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army in San Francisco, and she, in a sense, was radicalized by that group and conducted bank robberies, where I think it was either a policeman or a bank guard got murdered during the robbery she participated in, and she got off the hook, in a sense, because, well, money talks. Her parents were the Hearst family, and then I guess they probably tried to use it. She was brainwashed, but instead it was their own actions that did it, and so I have seen violence. I remember in 67, 68, up 70s, the violence in Seattle with the protests. I can remember the LA riots and the Rodney King riot. There's been a lot of riots and violence in the past, but again, if you're going to resort to the violence, you either you have to determine how far you're going to go and whether or not you're going to effectively change anything, because those violence actions never changed anything. We still have the black issues in our country. We still have the poverty issues in the country. So we have a systemic problem in our country that the government doesn't seem to be there's no will of the government, the representative government, to really change. I can understand the Black Lives Matters, but they had a black president for 8 years that never did anything really to change the system the systemic system that we're talking about right now. So it's a system that seems to be broken. So are we going to talk about a violent overthrow of the government? Some people would argue that's the way to go. And then if you're going to do that, you're going up against the most powerful military that has ever been conceived of mankind. And it can bring such firepower to play that literally the whole situation turns into guerrilla warfare like we saw in Iraq. And then we've totally we've killed the goose that made the golden egg. We no longer have a society. We have anarchy and violence everywhere. And then what did we gain by that? So, this is a complex situation, and it shouldn't be looked at philosophically at all. It should be a case-by-case basis of where are you with that situation and what steps have you already taken. And then if you really need to resort to violence, what is the most surgical way to use the violence that you get the most bang for your buck? If you want to really get the government of the United States or state governments and the city governments and the county governments to do something. Now, in the case of Seattle, I just read the other day that 51% of the businesses have permanently moved out of the downtown core area. And the interviews I saw, it was in Northwest News. I watched the interviews and read that those people have no intention whatsoever of coming back to Seattle again. They were long-time businesses in the core part of the city where the jobs are actually needed for oppressed people. So
I think that it's like that sounds like one of those causation issues, because I don't know to what extent a business moving is specifically due to protesting. I mean, we're sort of entering in this phase of like a post customer service society. A lot of the malls are closing. A lot of people are moving to like ordering stuff online. COVID has like impacted a lot of this as well. So, maybe companies can sort of blame this on, broken windows or something, but I'm not sure. I think that there's a lot of other factors to take into account on that. One thing that I wanted to say that you brought up earlier is talking about, to what extent did, the Watts riot and, Black Panthers or something, what did they accomplish? I think that a lot of times, and the author, what was his name? Peter Gerdelus did this book called How Nonviolence Protects the State, which I did a review of with the YouTube channel Reeducation. And he talked about how a lot of times some of the movements that we think about as being successful nonviolent movements, like Indian independence movement or the civil rights movement, were Martin Luther King and Gandhi were the lesser of two evils for the establishment. So their success, was due in large part to having these more radical, more violent elements acting as a counterweight. And so the establishment had to, sort of ask itself, okay, well, do I want to postpone change and maybe something more radical will come in down the line, or do I want to acquiesce to, the less radical of these two big movements and start making changes? I mean, that kind of goes back to the argument about, the protest needs to break windows and also condemn breaking windows, because it needs to sort of ride that fine line between, demanding, so much from the establishment and putting, sort of fear and demands onto the establishment, but then also having like a face that the establishment can work with and implement changes alongside.
Well, that's a very good point. I was thinking while you're talking there and listening, like the guy that wrote, people write a lot of books, but it's one thing to write a book about something and philosophically look at it. And it's another thing, like, for instance, I'm philosophically writing a book about swimming across the Atlantic Ocean. It's another thing to jump in the Atlantic Ocean and swim across the Atlantic Ocean, because you got tides changing, weather conditions changing, winds changing, storms coming and going. And so, you can't really, it's something you can't really put your arms around and come up with an absolute on. But I would think that a more effective way of going forward would be to have a pre-planned strategy that you present to, the walled-in castle, and you say, these are the steps that we are willing to go to, and escalated steps all the way up to completely destroying the country. At what point, how far do you want us to go on this? And then be perfectly prepared to start off with certain steps, and if nothing's met, no demands are made, then you take it to the next step until you have strangled the person so much that you're opposing, that they either raise their hand and call uncle, or they just collapse and die. Now that to me would be a much more effective and more ethical, moral way to approach. Because in the end, I believe that we have reached as a society the tipping point where this needs to be rethought. I watched the stuff going on in Portland, Oregon, and where the district attorney refuses to prosecute any person that was down there causing any violence. Just flat refused. And now the federal government is up the coin. They've sent in federal agents to prosecute these people, even though to me it's a states' rights issue, or in the case of Portland, it's actually a city's rights issue, how they determine how the society is going to run within a democracy. And the blur between the federal government stepping into states' rights. A state has an absolute right to destroy itself.
Well, I think that I think that they're trying to be careful. I know a lot of people were kind of wondering, like when the Chaz Chop kind of thing was going on. Oh, why aren't they just going in and bulldozing it and kicking everyone out with clubs and stuff in the same way that you're saying, why aren't they prosecuting these people that were engaged in rioting or whatever. I think that it's maybe a good sign that they are a little hesitant. That means that okay, well, we've just had months of protests off of this killing. We don't off of the George Floyd killing and the handful of other people that have died since. That we want to they are walking on eggshells, so to speak. But at the same time, so them not wanting to prosecute, them not wanting to go bulldoze, chop the minute that it was set up, I think that that's a good thing. But at the same time, that guy that got shot like 7 times in the back shows that maybe they're not walking on eggshells as much as they should, in my opinion.
Yes, I I mean, anybody that could agree that wasn't a complete assault against that guy. The way that they raised that up without using a billy club or a flashlight. They said they tried tasering the guy, but they never resorted to any type of, like tear gas or anything like that. So I guess So this brings us to another point. Is it seems to me that with Black Lives Matter, because that seems to be a big focus, we have an out of control a police establishment, and it's not just in one locale; it's nationwide. The police departments have hired, in a sense, people that were like special forces, Army Ranger type people to come on their police forces, and they've resorted to those types of tactics. And a lot of these policemen were served in Iraq and Afghanistan, where they didn't have a problem coming in and treating the Afghanese people or the Iraqi people different than they would be allowed under our constitution to treat people, and they just carried it over. They've been like programmed to be violent people, and yet we've got another issue. We have unions, so you can't even how do you deal with a system that is protected by a union, and people on both sides of the equation say, well, unions are good, they help oppress people. Well, they can be good or bad. See how everything has a different a blade on each side. You can't handle a blade like this topic safely on each side without having some type of gloves, because you get cut on both sides by going to the other side of the extreme. So it's I want my country to have a fair country where everybody has an equal shot, like was supposed to be promised to us when we broke away from England. And it probably hasn't been that way in 200 years. It definitely hasn't been that way with the black people, with the way that they've been treated constitutionally, and again by just systemic racism that's never been solved. It gets covered over, and I think but the black people themselves should be the ones instituting the change strategies, I believe. It should be black leaders that are instituting strategies. But when I look at Black Lives Matter's rallies, I see 90% of the people in many cases are white. And they seem to be just white punks that really are just out to cause nothing but no good. The senator from Kentucky, he ran for president a couple of years ago. His wife said that She thought they were going to be killed by the people yesterday when they were leaving the Republican National Convention. They thought they were going to be actually murdered by the people there. And so, well, maybe that would have raised the issue bar even higher. I don't know. This is such a
You bring up a point I'd like to touch on because
okay,
connects with something that you'd said earlier about outside agitators.
right,
I don't know to what extent the first that I kind of heard of this was the like Occupy movement, and it's like, oh, you know, if you're in this city, you hear all the Occupy protesters are sent in from a different city, and if you're in that other city, you hear that the Occupy protesters are sent in from the first city. But I guess this is a standard, you know, sort of a you know corporate media or whatever talking point that dates way back to probably before the civil rights movement. That oh, when these big you know protests are happening, these aren't your neighbors that are mad about how things are going. This is like these are people from the you know the other borough, the other part of you know bad part of town or something. I don't think that's the case. I mean, certainly maybe a majority of them are white. A majority of protesters are probably sort of college age people. Those are the people that maybe they don't have
yeah.
kids typically. They're not married. They might not have careers just yet. They have the access to, you know, that, I mean, that's just maybe if anything, it's just a example of systemic racism. What kind of people in the country are able to take a day off to take a bus to downtown or whatever and engage in a protest. That has a lot to do with, you know, if you're able to take time off or if you're like a college student or something that's able to go down there. But I don't think that that's a sign that these are, you know, disingenuous or that they're full of outside agitators or anything like that. I don't believe any of that narrative.
Well, actually, today on the news, I saw a bus that was from Seattle, and I guess it was at Kenosha, Wisconsin. It was full of people from an organization, Seattle, and they had lots of riot-type gear inside the bus, and they've all been detained by the Kenosha Sheriff Department or somebody. And then there was another bus that came from somewhere else where it had like Molotov cocktail stuff in it, you know, materials for that, and a lot of gear. Like it was, in other words, two buses that appear to be like a militant action of outsiders coming into the area. Now, I have to also look at the other side of that, because when you have a systemic problem that's nationwide, that, you know, in Germany, there was a guy, he was a Lutheran minister, and he come out with a saying years ago, and he says, first they came for the, you know, like homosexuals, and I didn't do anything, and they, you know, took care of them. Then they came for the labor workers, and I didn't speak up, and they came for them. And then it goes on and on and on. He says, then they came for me, and there was nobody to speak up for me. I probably screwed that up a little bit, but it's
No,
a
no,
pretty
I know
famous
that one.
point.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a pretty famous point, because maybe a person in Seattle could say, well, whatever happens to the people in Kenosha, we could be next on the list. So you see, there's a lot of different, you know, so maybe we're better off taking the offensive now and having the battle fought in Kenosha rather than on our own home turf. This is kind of the argument about warfare. Do we want to fight a major world war in the United States, which we never have, other than our own Civil War, I guess? Or do we want to have the battlefront in other countries where their infrastructure is being destroyed and win on those grounds? So this is so complex. This because it'd be different if we were just at an individual town and had a problem where the cops and it was corrupt. And there's been cases like that. There was a case where the citizens of the town overthrew the sheriff department and the courthouse because the ballot boxes were being rigged. You know, so keep this corrupted politician in power. You could never get rid of this guy because they would vote, and then the counters were inside the courthouse, and he always won. So they basically stormed the courthouse. It was a very famous case, and took the ballot boxes, you know, and counted them, and he didn't win. You know, so when a system is broken, which I believe, and I hate to say this, I hate to admit that our democracy hasn't worked, and our republic, you know, our representative form of government hasn't worked, but it's that way. And in a sense, maybe you need to throw the baby out with the bathwater in order for ever any real change. And if you did that, would the people themselves have a moral of, you know, morality about them that they wouldn't come to the same end in another, you know, 100 years? So we'd be right back where we were at, where broke people are being oppressed, different races and cultures are being oppressed, and this elite. Now, one other point before I turn it over.
Oh, Discord crashed for a second there.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
okay. We're.
did you hear what I said?
No, no, sorry. Start back where you. I'm sorry about that. Something.
Yeah.
Discord just
Well, the
crashed.
point I was bringing up too was that the strategy seems to be a wrong strategy by Black Lives Matters and other oppressed people, because the people that are in control of the system are not downtown. They live in a gated community out in the outer suburbs. You know, so if you want to have change, that would be now in Olympia, where I grew up in Washington. I was reading in the Olympia paper today, where the mayor of Olympia, this woman, she tried appeasing the protesters. Basically, come out into the suburb where she lived, somewhere off Capitol Way, and they stood outside of her house with whistles and cans beating and shouting and screaming, and now that got the attention of somebody that's the mayor. And then you have the police chief of Seattle. She was trying to protect her property. I guess she resigned because they actually came out to where she lived in Snohomish County, which is maybe, I don't know, 40 miles away. So you get a lot more press and a lot more attention when it's in front of a millionaire's house, or the row of businesses in Silicon Valley. If you were going to be protesting in the Bay Area of California, why would you do it in San Francisco when you could go south to San Jose and the Silicon Valley and get the Googles and the Yahoos and all those people and start burning their buildings down?
Yeah,
Then you would have change.
That's an interesting point that you bring up, because that was an argument during like the Watts riots and stuff. Oh, they're burning their own businesses, they're destroying their own community, and that
They
was
did.
something that a person brought up in the chat. People watching the live stream, someone brought up about the destruction of black-owned businesses, during some of these Black Lives Matter protests, and I've seen stuff that residential buildings, were burned and stuff like that. If you want to comment on that at all.
Yes, well, I think that here's what I know about again, I lived in that era, and they did. They burnt the buildings down, and the same way with Rodney King, where the Korean business owners in downtown Los Angeles, many of them who had been in the Korean National Guard or whatever, immigrants, they were on the rooftops of their buildings with AK-47s, and they didn't get touched because they were willing to defend their property. But what the result in bottom line is they did destroy a lot of businesses. And I remember the mention of banks and grocery stores were two that were heavily damaged and looted and burnt. The corporations that owned them, who sit in Wall Street or someplace, they said, well, we're not going to have a store there or a bank there anymore because our actuaries and the insurance company pins out that we don't make enough money in that neighborhood to justify with the threats that are there to have it. Now the people were saying, well, yeah, now this little old black lady, has to carry, she doesn't have a car. She's riding the bus for 10 miles to go get grocery shopping, riding it back. So they destroyed their own infrastructure. If you want to destroy infrastructure and not resort to violence where you're killing people, I guess that would be a good point. Why would you have to resort to shooting each other and maiming each other when if you took the property damage fight, right to where you can really get some, why burn a police cruiser when you can burn a Mercedes 500 SL? Whose attention would you get then? The person that's actually the oppressor, the one that's paying the lobbyists, that's paying the graft and corruption. You go get him. That little store owner downtown, can't give a campaign contribution large enough to have any effect in a democracy. You go get the people you can have effect with, and take the battle of them, because really, the argument seems to be the 1% against the 99%. How come there's been no action against the 1%? How come Bill Gates' mansions haven't been rushed in the Seattle area? What about the McCraw or something like that? You've got, what about the Google guy? Were Google's buildings burnt to the ground? I don't know. I don't live up there. Were they burnt to the ground?
Not that I know of. I kind of take what you're saying in three different directions, if I could. So I think a big part of why the wealthier people or whatever, their stuff isn't touched is like, well, they have bodyguards and they live far away. People aren't people are kind of protesting where they already are, and like when a riot, spikes off, the riot's like taking place where the riot already exists. So that's, I guess, kind of the main reason why people are kind of destroying stuff in their own local area. But as for like the destruction in the local area, I'm trying to think about this in two separate ways. So we already have a problem in this country with food deserts. If you go to a certain part of town and there's no grocery stores there, you go to a certain part of town, and when you go into the fast food place, they got bulletproof glass up and stuff like that. And that's like a problem in its own. But I also to what extent is closing down businesses or businesses leaving a response to riots? Specifically, a lot of times these are communities that have already been abandoned, to a large extent, as far as abandoned by giant grocery store chains or whatever. But then the other side of that coin is that a lot of people decry the small businesses that are damaged and residential that's damaged. I think residential areas being damaged is inexcusable. I think that is not acceptable. But I think that as far as small businesses, I don't even know when the last time I saw a small business was. It seems like you drive anywhere, around the country, and it's like Walmart, Target, Fred Meyer, Walmart, Target, Shell gas station. I don't. Where are these small businesses that are apparently getting burned? I haven't seen one in years.
Well, I know that when I was reading an article in the Seattle paper, the two of the businesses that were mentioned was a woman that had an upscale, because they went and interviewed her. It was like a dress shop, uppity, $400 purses or whatever they are. And there was a couple that have had like a Starbucks type operation, like drinks and all that kind of stuff, somewhere downtown Seattle. They were moving, the Starbucks type people were going to West Seattle to continue their business. They've been in business for a long time. The dress lady was moving to Bellevue Square Mall or something, and she had already established another store over there, and she was going to close the one in downtown Seattle. And because she said, and here was the reason she gave, this kind of ties in what we're talking about. These people had been pleading with the Seattle City Council to protect them from the violence and the panhandlers and the bottom 1%, the drug addicts and that. There's an actual YouTube video about Seattle is dying out. You can look that up on YouTube, and it goes into the whole drug problems in Seattle, and it's just basically destroyed the city anyway. I guess you got a good point on the one hand that they were already leaving anyway. But I know that those two businesses were not, closing up doors. But, the corporate stores have, I suppose, Nordstrom's and, like you say, Target and those people, they've already left those areas and abandoned them. So again, why would you fight a battle in an abandoned area? If you want to get change, you go where you can actually put the pressure on. Like the famous bank robber said, they asked him how come he robbed banks, and he said, "Well, that's where the money's at." I remember what that guy's name was, but that's another famous quote. It's where the money's at. That's why I rob bank. You know, and so if you want to elicit change, a systemic change, go where you can actually put the pressure. So I disagree with you. If we're talking about violence, whether it's acceptable or not, then burning residences is acceptable. I mean, why should a guy's apartment building be burnt down in downtown core area like Kenosha, and a rich guy out in the suburbs be left alone? Burn his building down in the whole street there. And by the way, I'm not advocating this. I wish we'd have a peaceful
On Minecraft, you mean?
Here.
In Minecraft is what the cool kids say.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah, they say, burn down the mansions in Minecraft.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not that young. I'm at the other end of the road. I guess I'm free to talk on this because I am at the other end of the road. I mean, my hourglass is rapidly depleting, but I do care about future generations and that something change here, because it doesn't seem to be changing. So, I've really got mixed feelings about taking a position against violence, although I do believe that you can take violence, and if you don't use it with a good strategy, then it just backfires on you. And you don't want to have tanks rolling down your street, machine gunning everybody. And so that depends on who the rulers are. Who are the people that is causing do they roll the tanks in and start machine gunning everybody? That doesn't seem like, your little pea shooter that you're taking or your Molotov cocktails. They can bring drones in and take you out just like they do in the Middle East. They can do those surgical attacks, and the next thing you know, you got 20 people that are leaders of your movement that are laying dead on the pavement, from an invisible weapon up in the sky. So there's just this violence thing needs to, in my opinion, if you're going to have violence, and I don't advocate it, I don't think it needs to take place in most cases, then it needs to be really surgical and a really well sought out strategy. You need to get somebody that's an expert on guerrilla warfare and those type of strategies to be, getting in doing some, you know, uh, discussion about that, so that it's not just chaos and unorganized.
The author Chris Hedges, he talked about to what extent, right, like we don't have the power or the numbers or the weapons or whatever to address the state
Right.
in a physical altercation. So what are the solutions? And I don't agree with him like 100%, but I do take a lot of I appreciate what he's saying a great deal. He says what you need is the numbers, the people. The problem is like when something goes off in Seattle or in San Francisco, they'll send in cops from out of town who don't know anyone there and don't, their opinions are like, oh, this is like, this is a super left wing city that's been like they let it go to the extreme left, and like these people are animals and need to be put down, pun intended, I guess. But that when you have the numbers, a army person or National Guard or police officer or whatever is going to have a lot harder time waving his club into a crowd when he can reasonably assume that his own friends and family are in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree with what he said there. I never read these books that you're talking about. You're right, because numbers. In fact, I was talking about this with some other people this week. Um, there's a point in, like Second Amendment. A lot of people on the left do not like the Second Amendment. They seem to want to diminish the Second Amendment. But with the amount of firepower in the
I
hands
don't
of
know
the
what
people,
leftist you're talking to.
well, I'm just saying. I mean, I just consider myself a nothing anymore because I don't really participate. But I'm not in the economic system that's oppressed right now, I guess you'd have to say. But the numbers is a major issue because, as you can see with the police forces, when they roll in 50 cops, and if there's 5,000 protesters, and those protesters resort to violence, then it doesn't make a difference what type of firepower 50 cops or even 200 cops have. They could be just overwhelmed by that many people, and close up, you've seen it. They start hitting them over the head with garbage can lids and everything else. And pretty soon the cops are in a retreat. So, you're right. I guess massive numbers, and to get massive numbers, you have to have some type of organization. So, I don't. I guess I just don't know how well organized either these movements are. Again, how much are outside troublemakers and who are actually participating as a movement? Like a Black Lives Matter or Workers of America movement, a union movement, where they used to bust heads, at the picket lines and everything, and the companies used to bring in the pink. They were called the uh, Pinkerton or
Pinkertons,
something.
the
Yeah,
Pinkertons.
Pinkerton
Yeah, yeah.
thugs, and they come in and murder people. I remember down at Longview, Washington, when there's a famous case down there where they brought them in and they murdered like 30 miners down in Longview, Washington, and nobody was ever held accountable. Nobody ever went to court or anything over it. It's just a big company town. But eventually, the labor union won. I met Dave Beck, the founder of the Teamsters Union, when he was in his 90s, and this was back in the 70s. And he told me that how the labor union got started in Seattle was over the Seattle Times newspaper. And they weren't getting anywhere with the company. And he told the company that if you don't agree to our demands, all of your trucks will be in Elliott Bay tomorrow morning. And they started taking trucks and dumping them into Elliott Bay. And that got the attention of the company. So it's different. Again, different strategies work, you know. And then you had to push back from the companies with the Landon Griffin Act, which made it illegal for people to strike without, there's big, it's just, it seems like the little guy has been oppressed in this country. Anytime they've had a position where they could win from, it gets taken away by legislation and as being somehow morally right. But again, how far do we go into violence? To get this change? Maybe throwing the whole country out and starting over again. But would that work? Would we be taken advantage of by other countries, other powerful entities that don't have our best interest in hand, and then we all lose? Would that be an argument? What if we all lose? What if everybody loses? I don't know.
To what extent do you think a lot of people, both in support of BLM and then people critical of it, are blaming the sort of shutdown as you mentioned we had like 8 years of Obama and BLM existed under Obama, but it didn't. The protests weren't at the level that they are now. To what extent is it that people are, home from work, their businesses are shut down, they're feeling the pinch, and people having, sort of free time in the way that they do? They're not doing necessarily the 50-hour weeks or 60-hour weeks anymore. That you're starting to see, more of a democratic representation of what people, believe in and want to fight for now than you would during, normal operating procedures, so to speak.
Well, I think but what was I going to bring? The point I was going to bring up, which I thought was a valid point, Dana.
About the degree to which COVID and the shutdown has increased people's ability to protest. Was it regarding?
Right. Yeah. And plus, it even throws more of another. Not only are the black people being oppressed, not only have you not solved any of the problems that have been ongoing, but now we have nearly 200,000 people dead in the United States. You've completely dropped the ball on managing the pandemic, and so and like in the case here where I live in Nevada, the governor shut the whole state's economy down. It's totally mismanaged. It's been mismanaged from day one, and you'd think that if this is our government, our representative government, that has no plans for something like a pandemic or any other national emergency, as we've seen with Katrina and some other big, disasters that have taken place where it was totally
mismanaged.
Yeah,
I've been bringing up Katrina a lot lately.
Well, it's a good point because in Katrina, it was completely, it's not so much that you can stop a hurricane. It's that when you pay people, you elect people that are supposed to, be good, smart people and everything. Why don't they have plan? Why don't we have respirators? I mean, how much could it cost to have enough respirators for every man, woman, and child in the United States compared to when you go build a nuclear submarine?
That's like Trump defunded our emergency response relief or whatever, right? Isn't that the reason? That's the reason I've been hearing.
I think there was some of that, but it also came out, and it wasn't just him or Obama or maybe even Bush. Evidently, the emergency supplies were so depleted, and like stuff was so old, the equipment, that it wasn't even usable. Masks were, like you can imagine something that's like 40 years old, and it's no longer usable because it gets cracks in it, and again. Are the people justified in violence to the point where, geez, our government's broken anyway? It doesn't.
Your camera's not coming through, by the way. I'm trying to refresh and stuff. Yeah. I can hear you. It's fine.
It says video connected, and I've got good bandwidth here, but except I don't know if. Well, it is 7:00. Is this when everybody goes on Netflix and Hulu and all that, starts streaming? Because I'm out here, I'm on broadband out here in the middle of nowhere. But anyway, I'm sorry about that. Anyway,
I guess we can still hear you. So if you want to just keep going, I'm fine with keep going.
Oh, so you can't see me at all?
I can't see you, but I can hear you just fine. I'm pretty sure the people watching can hear you just fine as well. Just can't see you for some reason. It's loading.
Again, when we started talking about this just about an hour ago, you just disappeared on me. But anyway, there you are. Now it's blinking off and on. Sorry, folks. Our infrastructure in our country is not what we thought it would be. When we first started talking about this, and I told you that it's such a complex problem that it's resulted in just hordes of people feeling that they need to go spend their weekends and days protesting and you know angry and everything. Uh, it's built up to this. It's not a simple problem. It was something that never was handled. Why did the police departments feel they could come up and shoot somebody in the back seven times? Why did the people think that they can put a knee down on somebody's neck when they say they can't breathe? Continue to do that. What kind of a person does that to begin with? And then why would that system exist when there's already been complaints going back? How many years have people been complaining about police brutality? And it's not just one case, and it's not just 1 year. So this has been building up, and I don't think the pressure valve can be released just by a bunch of friendly politicians coming to town and saying, "Oh, well, if I get elected president, I can fix it."
I
For
mean,
one
I
thing,
do think some good things are happening. I mean, Biden's was it Target Zero initiative is like pretty robust, a lot more than what's been. I mean, it hasn't been enacted yet, but Biden's Target Zero, I believe, is what it's called. Initiative is a lot more robust than what's ever been proposed for fixing this issue.
well, I don't believe anything Biden has to say about police brutality or anything, and I'll tell you why. He was the biggest advocate for lock them up, throwing just tens and tens of thousands of black Americans into prisons, and he was all for that. He even spoke in favor of it. We got to get this riffraff off the streets. I mean, you go back and listen to what that guy said. Second point, he was a powerful member of the United States Senate, had been in it for like 30 years. So he would be in a position of leadership, heading up committees. He did nothing what we're talking about. Nothing. In fact, he supported programs that were in the opposite of fixing what we're talking about. So this guy's got blood all over his hands, and anybody that believes him needs to. I got a Brooklyn Bridge. Now, I'm not saying Trump has done any different, but he's only been in office for political office for a little less than 4 years. Biden has been there for generations, decades. He's been involved in this. He was
I
the
mean,
vice
I don't.
president.
I don't think
You know,
that Biden's going to turn things around maybe nearly as well as like say Bernie Sanders had been talking about reforming police and prison and stuff since like his first run in 2016. But I suspect that he will do better than Trump's army of nameless, badgeless soldiers running around or abducting people in unmarked vans and stuff like that. That starts to be some really scary stuff.
well, that could be. I don't know. I think Trump's kind of had a hands off in a way. He's offered help and support, and
I
and,
don't
and
know. Those
frankly, I'm
people
not going
getting
to speak.
abducted in Portland seems pretty hands on. Saying they're going to send the National Guard into Seattle seems pretty hands on to me.
Well, that's
When he did his
that did
little
happen.
Bible photo op and he's having.
I don't know if that was him or again the failure of the people that were there in those type of military paramilitary type organizations like the what is it, ICE and officers and Homeland Security officers. I think they're made up of the same people the police departments are made up of, and I don't know if Trump intended for them to kidnap people like they did, but that's an inexcusable event that happened because their constitutional rights had been violated, and but I don't know if Trump was. I guess what I'm saying. I don't think if you were to have a discussion over a cup of coffee with him, that he would agree that, yeah, I think it's okay to go kidnap people against their constitution.
I don't
I
know.
just don't. I
He
don't
wants to
think.
label Antifa a terrorist group and stuff. He's the law and order guy, bringing the hammer down. I don't know. I
Well,
disagree.
okay. Well, then I guess it's a point I've not done that much research on. I was not there on site, but I know I'd be extremely upset if I was down exercising my First Amendment rights, and all of a sudden some thugs in uniforms, maybe they didn't have the emblems on them, threw me in the back of a van and hauled me off somewhere, and beat me up or whatever they did to these people. I'd be pretty upset too if that happened to me.
Because Trump
And
said in his interview with that Wallace guy on Fox News, I believe that's the interview where he said,
okay,
"Oh, we were threatening to send the National Guard or whatever into Seattle, and that's the only reason the Seattle Police Department, took out the chopper or the Chaz or whatever.
Well, Trump is one of the probably least educated people I've ever seen as president. I mean, I'll just stop flat say that because he makes a lot of statements that constitutionally cannot be supported. A state has to ask for a federal intervention unless it's a federal building. Now, federal government's got a right, like on a military base or a seaport or something, that they could come in and defend those. But as far as the infrastructure of a city, a village, the the um, that's why they haven't been able to do much because they couldn't come in because constitutionally it was a violation and the states hadn't asked them and actually told them to stand down. We don't want you in here. So Trump does a lot of stuff that you know he's done good in this country, but some of his statements are just so far out there. When anybody who studied the Constitution or our nation's history would go, "Are you kidding me?" You're what? It's just like and then he's got he's got Twitter. He's got Twitter. I think he's got it's got like a wire coming from his phone into his brain. He just puts his stuff out 24/7. But most people have kind of written him off as being, a big buffoon that is more of a shouter than he is a doer. But this is where we're at again. Why are we facing a presidential candidate on the Democrat side that most people just have to really stuff their fingers in their nose, plug them up to even consider voting for, and then a buffoon on the other side? Where is Americans' leadership and maturity at the leadership level? It's not from the Senate on either or the Congress. When I watch these people and they're self-serving demagogues that so where are we as a society? Maybe that the violence of oppressed people speaking out is justified to more degree, but I just can't strategically, I guess, or I don't know, morally.
I think that seeing what Biden does with I really wish I remembered the name of it, but
you've already seen what he's done
and stuff. Well, but
you've seen what he's done. He did
the executive. We've gone through over with each presidency. The reach of the executive branch has really become something else. The ability to write executive orders. And the executive powers and stuff have extended to such a degree that I don't think that Biden's effectiveness, as a long-standing senator, is going to be the same as like him on the, especially what do they call that? Your last, year or two as president when you're passing a whole bunch of stuff. I forget what they call.
Oh yeah, sure. You're a lame duck or something, or is that what you're talking about? Where?
No, it's like the last year of like a president's presidency. They start passing a bunch of the stuff that they didn't want to pass, in the middle of their presidency and get
oh, I get you, yeah.
Bipartisan complaints about or whatever. I wanted to so one of the things that I kind of wanted to make sure to separate what in our discussion is this idea that riots are political violence, but they're not planned in the way that like a Animal Liberation Front going and like burning a factory farm, or like the plowshares that I mentioned before going in and like doing direct action. That a riot is a very unique and very different form of political violence. And I wanted to read this quote that I think is very pertinent for what's going on in our country right now. This is a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. regarding riots. So Martin Luther King Jr. states, "Urban riots are a special form of violence. They are not insurrections. The rioters are not seeking to seize territory or attain control of institutions. They are mainly intended to shock the white community. They are a distorted form of social protest. The looting, which is their principal feature, serves many functions. It enables the most enraged and deprived Negro to take hold of consumer goods with the ease the white man does by using his purse. Often the Negro does not even want what he takes. He wants the experience of taking. but most of all, alienated from society, and knowing that this society cherishes property above people, he is shocking it by abusing property rights. There is thus elements of emotional catharsis in the violent act.
Yes. Well, Dr. King was assassinated in 1968. A different generation of black people, a different generation of white people, and to me, I've seen a lowering of social standards, if you will, of morality and what people are willing to do. But I don't think the majority of blacks in 2021, with their life experiences, would mirror that of a black in, say, 1962, Selma, Alabama. That's a different, because they were more family orientated. This was before President Johnson's, where he decided to put everybody in ghettos with his New Deal that he came out with, his New Deal, and in a sense has resulted in drug addictions and the destruction of the black families. There's a lot of articles and books written on that topic, that the blacks of 2021 live in a different matrix than the ones in the 60s, where everybody, white, black, yellow, green, were basically hardworking Americans
I know
wanting to
that
raise their kids.
a lot of
You know,
people so a lot of people frame this narrative around the New Deal, and I know that obviously the New Deal, from when it was enacted and stuff, it certainly had its racial biases. But my understanding is a lot of the sort of gentrification and the segregation that took place was from banks and bank loaning, and how the Marshall Plan and stuff was enacted. That caused a lot of the gentrification that we see in our country that exists, to this day.
well, it was called the Great Society of Lyndon Johnson, and it was a very ambitious plan. But he did develop the ghetto communities in Seattle. I remember there was several big ghetto projects that were put in. Yesler Estate, Yesler Terrace in the Capitol Hill area was a big ghetto that Johnson initiated. There was another one down in South Seattle, but I haven't lived up there in, like, a long time. I can't remember all of them. Those were all initiatives of his great society, where he thought government could solve all problems, and that's what his great society was. Well, the federal government knows what's best for everybody, and we can solve state, local problems from the federal perch here in Washington D.C. And you see where we're at right now. There's been some good of some of the federal programs, but I would say that most of those federal programs would not have been needed if we just had dealt with racism as a standalone and equal opportunity, rather than go to all the social programs. Because the black people, the yellow people, brown, everybody wants to work in those days. And it's just that when you hand somebody something free and destroy their will of working and everything, you did a damage to those people that far outweighed the systemic damage of racism that was going on. I think
No,
we could
no,
have
no.
dealt with racism.
I don't believe this kind of thing, that people that receive financial aid of various kinds, that it's a besmirches their character, and causes them to be, you know dependent and stuff. I mean, most people that are on welfare are working, and most people on welfare are white as well. I think that, a lot of times, we have the society where you need to be working, 50 plus hours a week to make ends meet, and there's not jobs anymore. I mean, so much of it has been automated through people ordering everything online, and robotic cashiers, and customer service is, if you're working at a factory, the hiring, practices of a factory are a little bit more egalitarian. But for customer service, the racism and the sexism and stuff that takes place for customer service hiring is very sharp. Hey, I don't I think that there's a lot more to consider economically. Big institutions, much larger than the individual, that's impacting someone's ability to make a living, for much outside of just, these people got welfare, and then having welfare, broke their ability to have, drives to be productive. I don't believe that narrative.
Well, the automation's only been in a few recent years. It wasn't back in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and that's when these people still wouldn't work. I would agree with you in the point where automation and computers And I've heard that there's McDonald's that are all automated, that there's no counter people or anything. You just go in there and somehow put your money in, and maybe a computer talks to you something. You order a Big Mac. I know that's been going on, and I know that at Walmart, and which I hate Walmart, but they've now most of the checkout stands are you self check, so they've eliminated people's jobs, gone to where you're actually are doing the company's job and actually paying them for the right to do it, which to me is absurd, but that's what people are willing to do. But so I don't know if you and I have ever talked about, but I've always been for what I figure a fair living wage, whether it even gets paid to you or maybe you have to go to a countrywide system where everybody gets a living wage, just set at some standard, and it has to be fair, and it has to be somewhat of some type of a redistribution of the just you know I don't know how many trillions are held in the hands of just a very few people. That we if we had even here was an example I read the other day. If you went back to the John Kennedy era, which I remember well, the Kennedy president, we had a 60% income tax rate for people that were making, I believe it was above 200,000 a year, but it's been a long time ago. But they paid 60% rate, 60%, and we had the most booming economy we've ever had in some of those years. And there was still lots of millionaires and everything out there. It's just that the wages and stuff were spread out over the population. Now that's not true. What is the what you know? There's people that are you know multi-billionaires that don't make it. They hardly pay any taxes or anything. And in those days, when it was 60%, there was not the deductions. All these special tax laws that the legislatures passed. Actually, Congress. Well, I don't. That's probably a whole other discussion we could have someday about addressing, you know, the disparity in wealth in the country and how that would change the whole system. We talk about systemic problems. Well, if people could actually have enough money that they can think instead of working 3 jobs, how could you even think about participating in democracy if you're dead tired from working 14, 16, 18 hours a day?
Well, yeah, I
You
mean,
know,
that seems to be like the argument people are making. Like I said, from both sides, you have people on the right saying, oh, the Black Lives Matter protest is artificially inflated by the shutdown. People are bored, when they're at home. But then you have people, on the left side saying, well, hey, wait a minute, people who used to be working, 50, 60-hour weeks are now, obligated to stay home, and they can now engage in politics in such a way that they might otherwise have done if they had the free time to do so.
well, that's a good point. That is a good point.
One thing that I wanted to bring up, we're getting a little bit close to the time here, but one of the things I wanted to bring up is that, okay, so Peter Gerdelus's argument that a lot of the movements we think of as being successful nonviolent movements like the civil rights movement and Indian independence had violent aspects of them that like sort of acted as this counterweight, and he compared that to things like the anti-Iraq war protests, which were the largest protests like in human history at the time, and overwhelmingly nonviolent. And kind of comparing what was the success of that. Well, I mean, the U.S. went to war with Iraq, and it seemed to have not been deterred in any way. I think Bush said, oh well, these protesters are expressing their democracy, and funny thing that like that's what we're trying to bring to Iraq, haha. And like that was like the response that the protests got from like the president. So I think that when you look at the protests now, and there's these fires and stuff going on, and it's making the national news, and it's the largest civil rights protests, in human history or whatever. And then you see potentially, they're talking more and more about police having body cams, talking more and more people are talking about, defunding or rearranging the way that the police are funded or structured, or Biden's having his big, platform. Do you see? I'm wondering if you see the inclusion of violence, the inclusion of burning buildings, as being the way to cross this threshold into seeing action, the way that maybe the Iraq War protests that did not have burning buildings, did not have the same efficacy, the same effectiveness.
Well, I don't consider burning buildings as necessarily violence. Blowing up power plants and stuff that the weather underground people were doing back in the 60s was more violent in a sense than infrastructure damage. But I can see that violence is newsworthy. And media drives most of what we're talking about, the opinions of people. So it's different if you have, oh, there's 60 people down with placards at the right to life or the Planned Parenthood place. Well, so what? What's the weather going to be tomorrow, Charlie? And it's like a nothing. But if you got 60 people down, they actually set a building on fire. You've got national news, so you stay with attention. The violence, if you want to consider that violence, destruction of private property, then it's a real attention grabber. You have to admit, if yesterday you were down at a Burger King and today you see it on news and it's on fire, that it gets your emotions going and gets you involved in the discussion because that was your Burger King. You know,
All
now
right,
you got to
that's
go find another Burger King. You know.
absolutely, yeah, I'd agree with that. So that's the time on the hour. Initially, I had us doing 2 minute rebuttals, which we can still keep, but I had this idea as we're discussing that maybe what we would like to do is 2 minute closing arguments with a mind to predictions, future predictions. Where do you think, the election? Where do you think? I know. Let's go ahead and make it 5 minutes because that's a lot to try and cover. But let's 5 minutes
Okay.
each. Hey, I'm moderating my own debate here. I can make that
Exactly.
suggestion.
But well, I'm going to have to call the radical reviewer as a tyrant when it comes to debates now. I'm labeling you a tyrant. But let me start off because you start off the first part.
Yeah. So this will be 5 minutes. 5 minutes closing argument / predictions. Where's COVID going? Where's BLM going? Where's the riots going? Where's the presidential election? Blah blah blah. So yeah, you can go ahead and start us off.
Okay, now we're in seems to be in our country, violence, demonstrations, and riots, and everything take place in the heat of summer. That's been the brownouts that they used to have on the East Coast, New York City, and everything. People would be out there sweating in the streets, and it raises people's tempers a lot more than the weather itself. So as we move towards the fall and into late winter, especially in places like Kenosha, Wisconsin, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and so lots of the Chicago's and that, you're going to get into winter months. So how many thousands of people are willing to sit out there for, let's say, 60 days protesting when it's an average temperature of 10 below zero? So I think there's going to be somewhat of a slowdown as we get into the winter months. But I think that once, whether Biden wins or Trump wins, I don't know who's going to win. Many people predict Biden wins. There's always a period, I think there's a term for it, where you kind of give the new guy a chance. They have like this period where they get a lot done in the early parts of their presidency. And with the type of systemic problems we're talking about, and the type of Congress we're talking about, I don't think there's going to be anything that's going to change. And I think that we'll just really up the ante, violence-wise, protest-wise. I think we are in stage one of what could be a multi-year transformative movement in the United States. And I think more and more people will get involved that weren't affected going into this summer or last spring and this summer, where the Black Lives Matter really started speaking up last February, I think it was. Yeah, I might be wrong on that. As we were going into the spring months, I think what you're going to see going into next year, will now that things are pretty much organized, is that people are going to be that people that are normal, casino workers, Boeing workers, those kind of people that normally stay on the stand line, they'll now be upset enough that they might join in, and it'll even increase it because it's really a working class, black people, the lower class. We have no middle class anymore, so I guess I'll just call it the working class. Middle class is like 100,000 a year in wages now to equal what the middle class was back in the 1960s and 50s and so forth. But anyway, I think it's going to get extremely violent, and there's going to be a lot of bloodshed, a lot of bloodshed. The streets will be running with blood, and if it takes that for the systemic change, then that's what will have to take place. Because I don't think the Americans, at least for the black people, and intellectual, it's not just poor people, it's intellectual people, are willing to just stand down now and say, oh, we have a new president, or oh, we have a new senator, oh, we have a new governor and he promised this, or Biden said he's going to have this plan. I think people a year from now will be going, man, that guy was just a phony, whoever it is, whichever it is. They were so phony. They had intent of change. All they did was put a paper, put a cocaine over it, and it's a joke killing people. You know, uh, I'll tell you what, I don't have a lot of confidence going forward that the republic that I grew up with is gonna be the republic 5 years from now. It'll be a totally different system in place, and I don't know what it is. I don't know how it will morph, but I don't think people backing off of that have. I mean, when you don't have anything to lose, if your brother got shot by a cop yesterday and it was on broad light, and everybody's got cell phones now taking pictures of this stuff, you go like, there you go. They told us there was going to be change, and there's no change. We backed off over the winter. We got nothing, so we have to up the ante now. Maybe we have to blow up the Space Needle or something like that to get it. I'm not saying I would agree with that. Again, I think
In
they're hoping
Minecraft.
for more. It could come to that. Could be major infrastructure down. So I don't know. I don't know if my 5 minutes are up or not.
You got 30 seconds if you want to end it there. I mean that's
I just kind of just bond it in a sense because in the 17th century, and I understand what our founding fathers thought about. I understand what I thought, was reality, and nothing has gone right for the average American. At least 40 years, maybe 50 years, and so there needs to be something. Not only Black Lives Matter people, but just the whole system itself is broken, and it favors just a very few people, an elite people that don't have interest
that's
in heart, yours interest or heart, anything.
that's that's time for us there. So then I will I will do my last 5 minutes here.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that oops, I'm getting a little bit of an echo on my end. I don't know if you have headphones in or what. Um, Maybe that's all right. So here's what I think. I think that Biden seems to be winning in the polls in most places. I think that Biden will probably win the election. A lot of people on the left are worried that a lot of the big push towards leftist movements came from the Trump presidency. Trump being such a reactionary force inspired a lot of the left wing movements that we've seen during his presidency. And I think like that might have had some small impact, to be sure. I'm not going to rule it out completely, but I think that a lot of the people who the Occupy movement happened at the end of the Bush years, and people thought oh, is Obama and the Hope and Change going to make the Occupy movement go away? Or is the Occupy movement like a big endorsement for Obama? And neither one of those things seemed to be the case. The Occupy movement continued despite Obama, and then the police came in and cracked skulls of the Occupy movement during the Obama presidency. And so I think that the popularity of Bernie Sanders came from the people who hoped things would be different under Obama and were wanting to move the envelope, a little bit more. Biden loses, and then that momentum, that dejected, dissatisfied chunk of the population is where we see this resurgence of leftist movements, through the Trump presidency. And I think that, like the Occupy movement continuing to exist from Bush to Obama, we will see Black Lives Matter and Antifa action continuing to exist past Trump and into the Biden presidency. Now, whether he's able to, for better or worse, I think that this is a good thing. Whether he's able to start enacting piecemeal change to sort of, take the core fighting spirit out of the movement by appeasing it. I think that's what they should have done during the Occupy movement. Is the Occupy movement was going on, and they could have got rid of it by passing, student debt forgiveness, housing debt forgiveness, and got rid of the movement that way. And instead, they went in and cracked heads. I'm hoping that I'm predicting that Black Lives Matter, with COVID and everything else, it maintains its momentum. And during the Biden presidency, rather than cracking heads, I'm hoping that they start passing some piecemeal reform kind of take the wind out of the sails of the movement. But then we're going to start seeing radical changes, in a very positive way. Um, that's as of right now, that's my prediction of where things are going. I think that COVID is not going away. I think potentially COVID is the new normal, or we're going to start expecting things like it in the same way that like hurricane season has been getting worse and worse because of like global warming and stuff. I think that the way COVID is, I think that's going to be the new normal. I think that Biden is going to win based on the polls and stuff, and I think if you look at something like how the public responded from Bush to Obama with the Occupy movement, I think we will see a similar thing from Trump to Biden with the Black Lives Matter movement. I just hope the way that we're seeing Biden appeal to Bernie Sanders type platforms and Bernie Sanders himself in a way that Obama didn't have a person that he was appealing to for change. Hopefully, rather than cracking skulls like Obama did for the Occupy movement, Biden will appease Black Lives Matter through at least piecemeal reforms. That's my prediction, and that's my hope.
Well, that's an interesting prediction. I want to thank you for having me on. We can talk about something later on again. But,
yeah, of course. Did you want to just quickly? Where can people find you at? I know you said this last time we spoke, but there's a Facebook, there's a radio show.
If you put Dwight Lilly into Facebook, Pahrump, Nevada, here I am, and to Revolution Radio.
Oh, sorry. You want to say that last part again? It buffers. Hey, Dwight, do you want to say that last part again?
Yeah, I'm on Revolution Radio, which is the largest listener-supported internet radio network in the world. I'm on there Wednesdays in Studio A from, 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time, and I'm on Fridays in Studio B between 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock. And so you'll see Dwight Lilly, you'll see my show. And I'm also, I'm on Facebook. I have a local radio show here on 98.1 FM that I was on just an hour before we did this. I had to hustle home here. That's on Saturdays, Saturdays only. So I'm on a radio about 5 to 6 hours a week. I do a lot of Facebook live streaming and try to stay engaged. I admit that I'm not that hip, I guess you'd have to say, if that's language from my day, of some of the issues out there. I suppose I'm just as frustrated as everybody else is. We don't have solutions to these problems, whether it's like you say, a far left solution or a middle of the ground solution. We just don't have solution. We don't have a solution to the wage problems. We don't have solutions to the healthcare problems. We don't have solutions to so many things, education. There's so many things we don't have solutions for, and you think we would, but we don't. So maybe our system itself is not a system as it's evolved to come up with solutions for large problems, and they just allowed to fester. Anyway, that's what I can say.
If you're watching, this, you probably know who I am already, but just to do the other side of the outro, I am the Radical Reviewer, primarily known for reviewing radical books, radical literature, but I also occasionally review movies and games and stuff on YouTube as the Radical Reviewer. Most social media places, Twitter, Discord, Twitch and stuff, Radical Reviewer, that's how you can find me. I appreciate you talking to me, Dwight, from The Dwight Show. I appreciate you having this discussion with me, and we'll have to do another discussion in the future.
Okay, you have a great evening.
Likewise, thank you.